Chicago. Well, we're bringing in Jordan Esparza-Kelly with Chicago's Council on American Islamic Relations to react to the latest. We appreciate you being here this evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jordan, let's talk about this new ICE Out pledge. As I was mentioning there, what commitments does this pledge actually demand from city leaders, and how does it strengthen Chicago's existing protections for immigrant communities?
Yes, so what this is just requesting is that these aldermen do not take contributions for their election campaigns from these corporations that have profited off of this immigration enforcement that we see happening, and how this strengthens the community against what we're facing is that the complex that we're seeing cannot really exist and function how it does without these private corporations. So essentially trying to narrow that scope of how it's able to function and, narrow the harm that's being done to our communities.
Another city council story your organization has been following closely. Alderman David Moore urging members to vote yes on a ballot, urging them for this referendum. It's asking Chicagoans if they support financial reimbursement for revenue lost during Operation Midway Blitz. Let's just take a listen to a bit of that, and then I'm going to ask you a few questions about that after this.
Most definitely.
But the cost of these tactics on our city budget is simply unexplainable, but I believe this is what the people of Chicago want. Chicagoans do not want to be terrorized, and Chicagoans don't want to continue to pay for this terroristic act. And so I'm asking my colleagues to vote in support of giving the people what they want.
Okay, and that was not Alderman David Moore there, but the measure passed overwhelmingly in council. What is your reaction to his statement, and do you believe that Chicago voters will support it on the November ballot?
Of course it passed, because that's exactly what happened when this whole Operation Midway Blitz hit Chicago, is that a lot of economic, finance was lost, especially in places like Little Village, which were ransacked daily. And Little Village, if I remember correctly, is probably the second or third largest economic corridor of the city of Chicago. So you have this community who now is not even going outside, right? So when people are not going out, we've learned this from COVID, when people are not going outside, businesses are not being patronized, that money is not circulating, and the economy needs money to circulate. So this is the right question to ask, and I'm not surprised that this went through at all.
Community leaders and families, especially in the neighborhoods, Albany Park, as you were saying, even for Little Village, there are many communities that talk about wrongful arrests, detentions, family separations that are still actively happening. From CAIR Chicago's perspective, what is the reality on the ground right now? I mean, we talked about how people have felt from Operation Midway Blitz, but what about right now?
The reality is still horrid, because what's happening is you have these ICE operations that are still ongoing, but pretty much it's the rapid response teams and organizers that are, facing the brunt of it, but it's not being publicized in the same way that it was before. And, the dangers of that when things fall out of the news cycle can really get swept under the rug.
When you say things falling out of the news cycle, I do want to address the fact that, we have covered the court cases. We have covered, we had reporters in Little Village just last week talking to advocates there. We have talked about the businesses that have been struggling ever since Operation Midway Blitz. So, we have continued to beat the drum that people are still very much so affected. I don't think that has fallen out of the news cycle, but do you feel like maybe advocates aren't speaking up in the same way that they did during the high-profile nature of Operation Midway Blitz?
I think the high-profile nature of Operation Midway Blitz drew a lot of civilian and journalist cameras in a different way than what's happening right now.
That's fair.
Because you had essentially a boogeyman in Greg Bavino being here, right? He's leading these teams. They're popping up downtown for, who knows what, right? And it's drawing a different kind of attention. Now, the circumstances have just inherently changed where you don't have that boogeyman. And also, let me say thank you for keeping that in coverage, right? But I think because the conditions of it have changed, the coverage has as well. And I think that's the difference that we're seeing. And on the note about advocates, there is a sense of, burnout that naturally happens with people that are doing this work. However, none of these groups, none of these rapid response groups are abandoning their community members, abandoning the work, abandoning their neighborhood. That's not happening at all. But I think the dynamic is just so different that it's appearing to us differently.
Thank you so much for coming here on the show. I only have about 30 seconds left, so I don't want to cut you off, but I do want to ask how you are still informing and keeping people safe.
Most definitely. Well, CAIR Chicago, in this city has a myriad of resources here for people dealing with a lot of different issues, but especially immigration and asylum. So, we keep our resources on deck for the community, cairchicago.org. They're there, but we're also just staying involved, keeping our ear to the streets, keeping our lines of communication open, and trying to monitor this situation as closely as everybody else, because this work is important to us. Our community is important to us, and we want to make positive change.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for watching each and every night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.